should always put our mind in the space of wanting to, of setting the aspiration to achieve enlightenment more quickly for the benefit of all living beings. The basis should be the great compassion, which wishes to be always of benefit to beings in all directions, but because one can't be of much benefit until one is more enlightened, or put another way, the more enlightened one is, the more beneficial one can be. One makes the aspiration to enlightenment out of great compassion. Of course, all beings will one day achieve enlightenment. All beings evolve steadily towards enlightenment. Why? Because nobody likes suffering and pain, and everyone likes happiness and joy. And eventually, moving towards happiness and joy, moving away from suffering and pain, leads us to enlightenment. So in that way, it said all beings eventually achieve enlightenment. However, it can be a very long time if one doesn't actually make any special effort. And for that reason, one attends Dharma talks, one practices Tupa Sambhagampa, one practices Dharma study, Dharma contemplation, and Dharma meditation. And by doing those three activities, instead of taking millions and trillions of lifetimes to sort of gradually be pushed and dragged towards enlightenment, one flies directly to enlightenment. Therefore, Tibetans have the expression Sechik Sangye, Buddha in one lifetime. If one practices well and studies well, trains well, then enlightenment in one lifetime becomes the option, becomes the possible. Thank you, thank you. Of course, there's Irish coffee secretly with very good quality single barrel Irish whiskey.
Should we hit this? We leave it for some.
So in this way, one makes the aspiration by attending a Dharma gathering. May I more quickly achieve enlightenment. Otherwise, just attending a Dharma gathering, flies sometimes come into temples and butterflies flutter through and so on and so forth, but they don't necessarily pick up a lot. Of course, they get a little bit of energy from it, but they don't get enlightenment in the lifetime as a fly. They don't get fly enlightenment or butterfly enlightenment or dragonfly enlightenment. The ancient scriptures state that human life is one of the very special forms in which we can achieve enlightenment in one lifetime, that there aren't so many life forms that can do that. Of course, all life forms do evolve, and although they may go up and down, and generally it's in an upwardly direction. All beings evolve slowly and surely towards enlightenment. But humans are one of those life forms where we can achieve enlightenment in one lifetime rather than in millions and trillions of lifetimes. So for that reason, Buddhists like to start every day generating joy in the heart and soul and mind, at being alive, at being human, at having at least one more minute of human life to practice and to deepen the enlightenment experience. Usually after that, we meditate on death and dying, how death is certain, all beings died, Buddha died, Nagarjuna died, Milarepa died, our own mums and dads, grandmas and grandpas, great-grandmas and great-grandpas. We can see them, deaths reflected there very clearly. When we contemplate, secondly, how we never know if we're going to die today, tomorrow, next day. Of course, on a higher level, if we achieve higher realization, we can get some kind of deeper knowledge, clairvoyant knowledge of our own life force and our own life process. So it's said that great yogis and great yoginis will know their time of death up to 14 years prior to dying. But short of getting on that level, everyone's always very surprised when they're walking down a street and they see a truck racing towards them at 95 miles an hour, careening out of control at them, and they always think, oh goodness, not me. Right. And so we start every morning by meditating certainty of death, uncertainty of time of death. And thirdly, at the time of death, we don't take any of our wealth with us. We don't take any of our power with us, our social power. And we don't, how's it go? So, a king leaves behind his jewels and a beggar leaves behind his begging bowl. And for a power that just as a king dies and wanders helpless alone in the bardo, so the simplest of living beings dies and wanders helpless alone in the bardo. And what do we take with us? All we take with us are our energies or karmic impressions that we gathered during this lifetime, and whatever wisdom or lack of wisdom we have cultivated. In other words, whatever enlightenment we have gathered, flowers of enlightenment, and whatever positive energy. Any lack of wisdom follows us like a dark shadow. Any negative karma follows us like a heavy weight. It said something like that. Thirdly, we like to contemplate on the vicious nature of samsara, of going round and round in circles. Suffering of birth, suffering of sickness, suffering of old age, suffering of death, suffering of tortures like the hells where people get stabbed by knives and shot by guns and beaten by sticks, and so on and so forth. And we don't have to look outside of the human realm for that, where half the humans on the planet are feeling some kind of discomfort at any one moment. And probably 1 or 2% are feeling very great suffering, aren't they? Suffering of hunger, suffering of war, suffering of imprisonment, and so forth. America alone has about 2.5 million people in prison suffering away. It's a democracy, so other countries, they may have less in prison, but they've actually shot them. So that's why they're not in prison. And we like to contemplate suffering and unhappiness in the world. And do it until we get a deep feeling in the very marrow of our bones. And when we do, then we appreciate a little bit more the necessity of wisdom and the necessity of enlightenment, the value of wisdom, the value of enlightenment. The great psychologist Carl Jung said that most beings only evolve with a problem principle. Unless they actually have a suffering, they don't actually grow. That for that reason, humans often have difficulty growing. If they can insulate themselves against the suffering, they can insulate themselves against growing. So in Buddhism, we don't think it's necessary to actually physically suffer or mentally suffer, but by contemplating the omnipresence of suffering, how it's always lurking around like evil ghosts following us wherever we go. Even great beings, what is it? The mighty Achilles became struck down by a little nick on his Achilles and tendon. And great Hercules, Samson had the sufferings of a difficult wife. Yes. the reality is more wisdom, less suffering. More enlightenment, less suffering. And so Lama Yeshe, one of my great gurus in the early 70s, he used to say we should begin our practice of compassion with ourselves, to meditate on our own limitations, our own weaknesses, our own failings, our own proneness to suffering, and feel sorry for ourselves, have compassion for ourselves, and say, goodness, I wish I weren't suffering. I wish I weren't prone to this suffering and that suffering. And by doing that, we are forced to look at the door to transcendence of suffering, which is wisdom and enlightenment. He also used to like to say, listen, baby, more meditation, more happiness. He learned his English from an Italian backpacker dropout types. And the reason he would say that about meditation is because meditation is often considered the most true and the most sure door to wisdom. From wisdom comes happiness. The opposite of wisdom is ignorance. From ignorance comes occasional pleasure and occasional pain, occasional happiness and occasional trauma and drama. So I'd been asked to teach something on the Milarepa system of healing and yoga, the healing yogas. In Tibetan they're known as Seta Zungtel, Amicayas, Hayagriva combined. Why do we practice? Actually, the Tibetan word for them